You see in front of you now what should be pretty familiar. Psalm 90, the first 3 verses, here with 63. Okay, because we're going to focus on that a little. And you see, of course, our friendly... Whoops, oh no, I'm going to have that problem with this. I was hoping not to. You're going to see our friendly Isaiah 53, which we're going to talk a lot about. And I'm going to go through the clauses because it's going to become really important to understand Daniel. And then, of course, here on the right-hand side, you can see this 42 here. See where I'm moving 42? Okay. That's the map of Isaiah 53. But we're also going to get into this, which is the outline, again in Hebrew, because it's easier to follow the numbers if I just show you the Hebrew, of Daniel 9 itself. Okay, his prayer. All of the numbers you see God use in Daniel 9:24 are coming from Daniel's meter here. That is something you cannot see in the English, so it comes out of thin air in the English. But it isn't coming out of thin air in the Hebrew, because if you know what the meter is, see, and this is the meter. Okay, this is, can I get this to work? The 49, can you see the 49 in the second line? I may have to change the way I show this, because Adobe is pretty bad at highlighting. Okay, there's the 49s highlighted in dark blue. That's not very helpful. I can't stand Adobe, I'm sorry. So these are the meter counts here. Yeah, we're going to probably... I'm not going to use this very much in this segment of the video. I'll have to change it to something that better highlights than Adobe. Adobe's pretty crummy, actually. That's the 73 being highlighted now in medium blue. These are syllable counts, aggregate syllable counts, and then there is a differential in the syllable counts that's going to become important because he's benchmarking to Isaiah using the differential. But these are the total syllable counts. And I'm going to go through why they're what they are, because I know now. But we're going to have to do it in the context of... Sorry about that. We're going to have to do it in the context of what went before, so you can see that Daniel's actually following a rhetorical style that we've already talked about almost in excruciating detail. And I need to go back through what that style was so that when you see it in Daniel, you're familiar with it and you're going, oh, I understand. I mean, hopefully that's where it's supposed to go. So let's start. What I want you to understand is that there are 6, I mean it, 6 different ways the meter is used in Psalm 90, Isaiah 53, Daniel, and in Paul. And the way that this meter is used tells you a lot of information that somebody who memorized it would automatically be reminded of because of the meter. Alright? That's something you cannot see in the English, obviously. You know, the English is not metered, and it doesn't give you any kind of alert in any of the Bibles that this meter matters. And that's basically because scholars don't even know that it matters or what it is. So hopefully, you know, sometime by the end of the century, somebody's going to pick this up and, you know, work on what this librarian is presenting or find it out on his own. And that way, you know, Christendom can find out about it. Because it's really important. It's doctrinal. It's doctrinal meaning. It's essential to hermeneutics. It's essential to dating Bible books. Okay? It's essential to textual criticism. Because in textual criticism, you're trying to make sure that you have the right words that are really the Bible's. Well, if it's metered, okay, then you know that you've got the right words because the meter fits. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. All right? It's very clever. And when you see how what do you want to call it? How complex and self-auditing this meter is, you're going to feel a whole lot better about your Bible. But you're also going to hopefully realize that you better start learning it in Hebrew and Greek, and it's not hard. 5-year-old Hebrew kids learn Hebrew, 5-year-old Greek kids learn Greek, and if we ourselves were 5 years old when our parents taught us Bible, then you wouldn't need a brain out to explain this. You'd know it already. Okay? So the fault is not in the fact that it's in Hebrew and Greek. The fault is that we didn't learn it. Why? Because we don't care about the Word of God. We Christians are all liars. We do not care what the word really says. We want to use hearsay, or we want to use a translation, or we want to use something else other than what God wrote and preserved for 3,000 years. That is a stain against us. And hopefully by the end of the century, that stain will be rectified, because we have the right technology now. It's really easy to learn this now. It wasn't easy in past generations, and you can excuse them to some extent, except the past generations did learn this. 100 years ago, it was pretty common for people to be able to read the Bible in Hebrew and Greek. Just 100 years ago. The Greek was taught in school. You had to learn it in high school and junior high school. I mean, I was one of the last of the generations who had to learn Latin in high school and junior high school. And then the curricula changed, and you didn't have to learn it anymore. So this is a stain against us. And anybody who's telling you that a translation is enough is a liar. Of course, he doesn't know any better, but he's a liar. Because he's saying that a word that isn't God's is better than or a good replacement for the words that God preserved. I'm sorry. Such a person is a liar and is a bad Christian. End of story. So now, enough of the ranting. Let's get into this. 63. Remember, hopefully you remember that in covering this before, the very first paragraph of a chapter or a writing that the writer does, once it is divisible by 7, like here, that is a dateline, a time stamp. And in Moses' case, this represented 63 sevens from the time of Israel's going into slavery, which, as you saw in previous videos, was 1830 BC. Okay, 390 years. Okay, prior. Actually, well, he's writing 441 years because he's 40 years after the Exodus. 390 years after Israel was enslaved, the Exodus occurs. But her total time in Egypt was longer than that. But she wasn't enslaved during that entire time. And I went through the accounting on that in the Moses Counts the Millennium video prior to this. Okay, so we know that this is a dateline. It also represents, the fact that Moses is writing this in the 1050th anniversary of the flood. And he's writing the way he writes because after the 350th syllable, which is down here, after the 350th syllable, right here, that will be 1050 BC. So there's 1050 in back of him when he talks, and after he finishes this, which is 350 years later, he's giving a history, that will be 1050 BC in front of when he talks. So it's real easy to know when he writes. All right, we went through that. So, if you don't remember, go ahead and look at the videos again. And, hopefully it'll come back to your mind. So that's what this first paragraph divisible by 7 means. It's a dateline. Okay, it means other things too, as we're going to go through. But that's one of the ways that the meter is used. That's the first way it's used. Okay, and we saw that same thing happening with Isaiah here with the 42. Isaiah is writing 42 sevens. Okay, I covered that extensively in the last video just prior to this one. Isaiah is writing 42 sevens. He's 42 sevens prior to, the date he writes, which we went through, you could interpret as either 756 BC, because 42 sevens prior to that was 1050 BC, where Moses leaves off, or 42 sevens from David's birth, which was 1040 BC, 10 years later. And then you could say that he was writing as of 1046. And in the video prior to this one, where I said Isaiah counts the millennium, we determined that the more likely answer is the 756, or 754, not 746, because 42 sevens from the 754 was the end of the voting period, which Isaiah covers in Isaiah 53. It's a real important benchmark, which we're going to go through in this video. Okay, so that's his dateline. It also happens to be that 42 years into the reign of Azariah, I think it was Azariah. Yeah, Azariah, the guy who got leprosy. 42 years into his reign, Isaiah got his call, and that's also the same number of syllables, 42, as in Isaiah 1:1, which I covered in the last video. So this is a dateline in Isaiah too. Okay, so we saw that. Now, it's also a dateline in Daniel. Hopefully I can get this up without the computer going wacko. Right here, 49. Oh, please. Right, we see where the yellow is, the first yellow is, and the 49 in orange. I wonder if I can make this 100%. Okay, let me make this bigger. Okay, see where the 49 is here? See, I'm moving the screen, and I don't know if you can see the hand. I don't know if it shows on the recording. But that 49 there, with the footnote A or the superscript A, the 49 that's in blue here, all right, that's 49 years after the temple fall. That's how Daniel's doing his dateline. All right, that's the first paragraph. It's actually the first verse. Divisible by 7 is Daniel 9:4. The whole verse is divisible by 7. And as I can see, there it is on screen. And that 49, highlighted in light blue, is 7 sevens after the fall of the temple. So he's writing at the beginning of the 49th year after the temple falls. Now Daniel does something additional with his dateline. And he does this to tell you that he's tying to Moses. Right there, that 73, see where it's highlighted in light blue? That 73, highlighted in light blue with a footnote B, sort of on the left-hand side of your screen, in Daniel 9:5. That's the cumulative number of syllables at that point, and that is 73 sevens after Moses' deadline right here. So Daniel is pegging, just like Isaiah had done, to the 1050 BC ending in Moses. So Daniel is picking up what he says at the point where 1050 BC was. He's doing that because 1050 BC was the time when Israel rejected God as king and had Samuel be king instead. And so just like Isaiah had done, we saw Isaiah here, just like Isaiah was picking up his 42, doggone it. Oh, I can't stand this program. Just like Isaiah was picking up his 42 right here. See the white? I'm sorry it's in such small print, but just notice that it's 42 syllables. That much you can read. Just as Isaiah was pegging 42 sevens, so Daniel is pegging 73 sevens here in the blue. If I could get it to highlight properly. See, right there. That light blue, 73, and it says B footnote. Okay, and you can download, by the way, all this stuff I'm showing on screen. So just look in the video description, you can download it. I also provided the English translations too, so it'll be easier to follow for those of you who have trouble with the Hebrew. Okay, so Daniel is using this as a second dateline, saying, hi, I'm writing to you 73 sevens after 1050 BC, which of course is 539 BC. In other words, that's why I know that this 49 here is the beginning of the year. So if you want to call it 538, you can, but it would be at the beginning of our 538 BC, or the ending of 539 BC. We know it's the ending because this is 73 sevens. So it's 73 sevens after, therefore at the end of 73 sevens following 1050 BC. So it's the end of 539 BC, beginning of 538 BC, therefore the beginning of the 49th year after the temple goes down. All right, so we've seen this now in three different writers, all following the same convention. First paragraph that's divisible by 7 is used as a dateline. In Daniel's case, he's also using, because he's tying to both Psalm 90 and Isaiah 53, so he's using this to tie to Isaiah, the 49, and I'm going to show you how you know that. And then he's using the 73 to tie to Psalm 90. Okay? It's really important to know that that's what they're doing. but you've seen it 3 times now, so you know that this is a pattern. Paul is going to do the same thing with his first paragraph divisible by 7. In Ephesians 1:4, it's 56 syllables. That's the first time what he writes is divisible by 7, beginning with, his actual text rather than the greeting. And so that's an Anno Domini accounting. He's saying he's writing when Christ would have been 56 years old. So they're all 4 following the same convention, using the first divisible paragraph of 7. First when the syllables are first divisible by 7. And that's always closing a verse. It's not like in the middle of a verse. All right, it's at a close. Okay, see that little double colon there that looks like 2 diamonds with a 7 at the left? That's the Hebrew marker for saying that that's the finish of the verse. So they all follow the same convention. By the finish of a verse, once it's divisible by 7, that's a dateline. Daniel is using 2 datelines because he's tying to 2 different passages. The 73 dateline is tying to Psalm 90. This is very sophisticated stuff. And Paul is going to tie to all 3. That's why I'm taking such a long time to get into Paul, because you have to know what went before, what was the rhetorical style that he's emulating. And he's particularly emulating Daniel. All right, so that's the first use of the meter. Okay, let's see if I can get this to be a little bit bigger so you can see it better. Of course, if you can't read Hebrew, that's not going to help you much. I'll try to make it better. Okay, that's the first use of the meter, dateline. Hope you got that. All right, now the second use of the meter, this gets really sophisticated and complicated. The second use of the meter is as an annual chronology, or as a chronology, not necessarily annual. And we saw that here in Psalm 90, where Moses is taking, after he introduces the decree, which is this first 4 verses, all right, which I've covered before, so you should remember that by now. Then he goes into a panoramic review of history. These first 4 verses are the reserved millennium, plus the 14 years Israel's going to be short. It's 70 syllables plus 14. The reason why it's 70 syllables is to designate the entire 1050-year time unit. And the 14 are added to the 70 because Israel's going to be in trouble during the last voting period pre-Christ. And that, of course, is the period where we got Nehemiah and the post-exilic books. Okay? And we're going to go through that more because Isaiah covers it extensively. He covers it year by year. So we saw in Psalm 90 that we had at the Adamic voting period right here, verses 5 through 8. That was their testimony on both sides, believers and unbelievers alike, about the futility of life. And then in the Noahic voting period, from verses 9 through 11, that was the testimony of believers then also. And, you can look it up and see how pregnant the wording is. All right? And then we come to Moses' own voting window, which led to and caused the Exodus, which is verses 12 through 15. And we saw how pregnant that was. And we're going to see more about it because Isaiah is talking back to it. And then our last voting window pre-Christ is covered as 56 syllables rather than 14 because that's where Israel's going to be short. She might not make it. That's the warning. Okay? So that was the panoramic use of Psalm 90. We got 4 voting periods. You'll see these 70s here on the right, the 4 70s and a 56. That's time. And then up here is the reserved millennium, first 4 verses. Okay, that was the first chronology use of Psalm 90. The second chronology use of Psalm 90, which you just saw in the last video, was a straight 350-year annual, annual tracking. And we saw in that last video how it benchmarks right here at the 210 marker, and it benchmarks at the 350 marker for the judges. The whole book of Judges is benchmarked to Psalm 90, but it's not in any detail. It's just benchmarked at the middle, and it's benchmarked at the end. Why? Because Judges was a time of apostasy. So there wasn't much to say, and even the timeline that is given to you, it's sort of subsumed, and I showed you that in the last video. the worksheet on Judges. And if you can download that worksheet from the previous video. Okay, so he's only benchmarking at these 235s. All right? That's the only place it's really benchmarked. So that's the second chronology that we saw in Psalm 90. Now, I've talked about, but not enough, the fact that Isaiah is doing the same thing. He's doing a panoramic review right here. Oops, doggone it. From first David to last David. All right? I don't know how to make this program fit. It's very annoying. He's doing a chronology from first David to last David. Oh, aggravating. Just aggravating. Okay? This is what happens when people don't study the Word of God. They become incompetent in their regular job. If you want to become a competent person, learn and live on Bible. I'm dead serious. God has to give you a higher IQ to understand it. So then that higher IQ you end up having for everything else. That's why I seem to be smart. It's the only reason I'm smart is because I use 1 John 1:9 and study Bible. Period, over and out. Okay, so this is what Isaiah is doing too. He's also doing a chronology. And we're going to go through that in quite some detail here. All right? Now this chronology that he's going through is bifurcated. Just kind of like Moses was, and it's got ellipsis in it just like Moses used. Okay, these first 77 syllables depict the first David. They start at his birth, and they go till he's 77, which is when he dies. Scholars don't know that because scholars are incompetent at reading 1 Kings 6:1, and instead they prefer to read Josephus, who's completely wacko when it came to numbers. Josephus didn't know straight up from straight down about numbers. Of course, that wasn't his job either. Okay, he was supposed to be a military guy. And military guys often don't understand numbers. They should, but they don't. Okay, and so he was very incompetent when it came to reciting Israel's history of years. All right, and that was because he used the Seder Olam Rabbah, which was invented by some guy named Yoshi or something during the Hasmonean period. And so all of his idea of years is wrong, just like Israel's idea of years is wrong even today, because they're making the same mistake Josephus made. So this 77 years depicts David's death. From his birth to his death, right here in this paragraph. Then there is a hiatus, because it's a straight chronology. This is where he emulates Moses. This is a straight chronology from first to last David, but there are years in ellipsis. Okay, and he does that so that he can make the whole chapter pregnant at 462 syllables, which hopefully you've seen me cover in my Isaiah Future Calendar video, which is at the beginning of my Psalm 90 playlist. Okay, once you get to David at age 77, there's a break. There's an ellipsis. The amount of the ellipsis in this section right here, which you can't see because he's not writing anything, is 252 years. That's really important. 252 years. This starts here at 1040 BC, goes all the way to David's death in 963 BC, and between 963 BC and 712 BC, which is when Isaiah 53:1 is pegged. And that's Isaiah talking in first person, and he's talking to Hezekiah, and that's what this is going to signify. At that point, there's 252 years between David's death and when Isaiah is picking up the narrative here in Isaiah 53:1. This part of it functioned as a decree of God, which I'm going to cover later. This part of it starts an annual chronology of what's going to happen to Israel until the last David, a.k.a. Messiah, a.k.a. Jesus Christ. What's going to happen until he dies. He was to come and die on a schedule. I've covered that before, but I'm going to cover it again because I want you to see the coverage. It's really awesome. So just bear in mind that there's like a little parenthesis of 252 years in here. Okay? And now we pick up at Isaiah 53:1. So our second use of the meter is as a straightforward chronology with or without ellipsis. Okay, what Isaiah is doing is kind of similar to what Moses was doing in the second. When Moses did this thing, he did a straight chronology of 350 years from the time which he writes, all 350. Okay? And there's no ellipsis in Moses, but when he was doing the panoramic accounting of the Adamic voting period, then the Noahic voting period, then his own voting period, and then the future, all that had years in ellipsis between, because he's accounting by voting periods. Okay, the years ellipsis in between in Isaiah are years in between that are part of an annual accounting. So he's not doing it by 70s. All right? He's not following that convention that Moses used. All right? He's doing a straightforward annual chronology of Israel's history from David's birth forward, first David to last David. And that's real important to know, because that's exactly what Daniel's going to do. He's going to follow the exact same convention of annual chronology that Isaiah uses. All right? And he's going to use that as part of his petition to restore the temple. That's why this is important to know. Okay, now, this annual chronology in Isaiah begins right here, 712 BC with Hezekiah. Every single syllable represents 1 year. So what he does is he goes through a straightforward chronology, and Daniel's going to emulate it, all the way out. The thing is that there is an ellipsis of years right in here between Isaiah 53:10 and Isaiah 53:11. The ellipsis amount of years is 364 years, which you hopefully saw when you saw the Isaiah Future Calendar trailer video. Okay, that's where the second ellipsis is. Otherwise, it's a straightforward year by year, syllable by syllable accounting. Okay, now Daniel's going to do the same thing, and then I'm going to go through Isaiah, but I want you to see how Daniel's doing the same thing, or at least get a preview of coming attractions. Let's see if I can get it smaller. Daniel's doing the same thing. Oh, come on, come on, come on. My mouse won't work. I'm sorry. I hate Adobe. It is so buggy. This is one of the buggiest. Okay, I can't make the screen bigger. Don't ask me why. It keeps on flipping out. It won't. The mouse won't. It just won't happen. Okay, so you're just going to have to follow it in smaller font. Okay, this part we saw was a dateline in Daniel 9. That's a dateline, so it's not part of the chronology. This too is a dateline. The verse 5 is a dateline. Okay, so that's not part of the chronology. The chronology begins with David, just like Isaiah does, here in verse 6. Okay? That's where it begins. And then the chronology ends at verse 14, and it's ending with Daniel's own capture by Nebuchadnezzar. So it's running from, in his case, he's stating it from David's kingship at Hebron in 1010 BC. He's starting there, and he's ending it at 607 BC when he is captured by Nebuchadnezzar. He's not finishing at the temple. Okay, and we're going to, I've got to go through the content ties, because the content in each of these verses ties. But I got to go through that in later videos, with Daniel especially. Okay, he's going through an actual chronology of Israel's kings using the meter to do it. In other words, God knows what he's thinking. So he's saying certain words aloud, and he's, in his mind, because of the meter, he's benchmarking what he says aloud to a specific period in Israel's history under a specific king, and he's benchmarking it by when the king went bad or when the king went good. And in David's the only king whose entire period was deemed good, because that's the 40 years that David ruled, which means he's dating it from 1010 BC when David was crowned at Hebron. All right, just know Daniel's doing that, and I'm going to be covering that in more detail in later videos. Okay, so how is Isaiah doing it? Because Isaiah sets the precedence for how Daniel's going to do it, and then Daniel sets the precedence for how Paul is going to talk. It just blows me away. Okay, so here's 531. Here's 53:1 in Isaiah, and I'll loosely translate these as I go along. Hello. See, there's 53:1 right there. That's the whole verse right there in Hebrew. And he's talking about Messiah, obviously. That's the first and topmost layer of meaning. But underneath it, each verse and each clause is benchmarking a time in Israel's history prior to Messiah to characterize what that period in history is. So that when he's doing the whole passage, first to last David, this method of benchmarking to the individual kings is basically saying, see how Messiah wraps up all time. See how Messiah solves all the issues of that time. Everything is in Christ. Everything is in him. All time is in him. And of course the book of Hebrews is about that, even though it's mistranslated. In Hebrews 1:2 and Hebrews 1:3. So in our next increment, we're going to go through year by year. Well, not year by year, but benchmark by benchmark. We're going to go through Isaiah.